My name is Chloe. I am 30 years old. Last night at a high-end Chicago steakhouse, my father raised his martini glass and announced he gave my entire $80,000 wedding fund to my younger brother. He looked me dead in the eye and said my brother deserved a real wedding to impress his business partners, while a backyard barbecue was good enough for someone as quiet as me. I did not cry. I did not yell. I just looked at my fiancé, Julian. Julian stood up, pulled his phone from his suit pocket, and looked at my brother. "Should I tell them what I do for a living?" he asked. My brother's smirk disappeared. What Julian did next cost my brother his business, his wedding, and his freedom. Before I tell you how a single phone call dismantled my family's golden boy, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set a boundary with toxic relatives. Now let me bring you to that table at Morton's in downtown Chicago. My parents, Richard and Susan, called it a family meeting. I am a financial risk auditor. My brain runs on ledgers, compliance regulations, and spotting anomalies. When people who have ignored you for months suddenly want to buy you a $60 steak, that is an anomaly. Tyler sat across from me. He is 27. Wearing a watch he could not afford on a marketing coordinator's salary, and a smug expression he has worn since middle school. My parents always treated him like a prince in waiting. Every scraped knee was a tragedy. Every bad grade was the teacher's fault. I was just the shadow who paid her own way through college and fixed their tech issues. My father leaned back in his leather booth. He cleared his throat. "Chloe?" He started, using his practiced corporate voice. "We transferred the $80,000 from the wedding trust to Tyler yesterday." He said it like he was ordering another side of asparagus. "Tyler is marrying Maya next month." My mother chimed in. She reached across the table to pat my brother's hand. "He is opening a high-end restaurant franchise. He needs to project success. He needs a grand event to network. You and Julian are so low maintenance. You do not need a big production. $80,000. A trust set up by my grandfather intended for my 30th birthday or my weddings, whichever came first. My 30th birthday was exactly 1 week away. They drained it right before the legal control transferred to me. Tyler took a sip of his wine. "Come on, Chloe. Do not make a big deal out of this. It is family money. I need it for the Avalon Hotel franchise deal. You know how these corporate guys are. They want to see backing." I looked at my plate. The knife lay perfectly parallel to the fork. I did not feel betrayal. Betrayal requires surprise. I felt the cold, familiar click of a vault locking shut. I had spent 30 years being the spare part in this family machine. I turned to Julian. We had been engaged for 8 months. My parents thought he was just a mid-level office worker because he drove a sensible sedan and wore plain sweaters to their Sunday dinners. They never bothered to ask about his actual title. Julian wiped his mouth with his napkin. He placed it on the table. He stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. He looked like a man about to execute a routine audit. "Should I tell them what I do for a living?" Julian asked. Tyler scoffed. "What does your cubicle job have to do with my restaurant?" Julian pulled his phone out. "I am the vice president of franchise risk control for Avalon Hotels." The silence at that table was heavy enough to crack the marble floor. Tyler's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. My mother's hand froze in midair. The silence inside the steakhouse was heavy. It felt like the split second before a storm breaks. The background jazz music playing through the overhead speakers seemed to fade away. The clatter of silver forks against expensive porcelain at the neighboring tables vanished from my awareness. Tyler stared at Julian. The smug certainty melted off my brother's face, replaced by a slow, creeping confusion. My father adjusted his collar. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his footing. Growing up, my father always believed that raising his voice equated to establishing authority. "What kind of joke is this?" my father demanded. "Avalon is a global hospitality brand. You work in a cubicle, doing data entry." Julian did not raise his voice. He reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen. He slid the device across the white linen tablecloth. It stopped right next to my father's half-empty martini glass. The screen displayed an internal corporate directory. There was Julian's professional headshot, looking sharp in a bespoke suit, right above the Avalon Hotel's corporate crest. Underneath his name, the title read, Vice President of Franchise Risk Control. My parents had assumed Julian was a low-level clerk because he drove a reliable sedan and preferred simple wool sweaters over flashy designer brands. In their world, wealth had to be loud. They equated flash with success. Julian understood a different reality. Real power does not need to announce itself. It just waits for the proper moment to act. My mother leaned forward. Her eyes darted between the glowing screen and Julian. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her designer blush looking like paint on a ghost. I oversee all high-net-worth franchise applications for the North American division, Julian explained. His tone remained conversational, but carried a layer of hardened steel. Every business plan, every background check, and every financial disclosure crosses my desk before a single contract is drafted. It is a rigorous process designed to weed out liabilities and prevent corporate losses. Tyler swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. The confidence he had worn into the restaurant was fracturing. Imagine my surprise, Julian continued, resting his hands on the table, when a franchise application for a luxury dining concept in the Gold Coast neighborhood landed in my queue last Tuesday. The applicant was Tyler Sterling. Tyler gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles turned white against the dark wood. And imagine my further surprise, Julian said, his gaze locking onto my brother, when I saw that the applicant had also booked our flagship Avalon Grand Ballroom for a wedding reception next month. A booking secured with a $50,000 deposit. My father tried to force a chuckle. It sounded like dry branches snapping underfoot. Well, isn't that a fortunate coincidence? Family working with family. You should be helping your future brother-in-law expedite the paperwork. Julian, this is a great opportunity for everyone. Julian did not smile. He retrieved his phone, tapped to open another file, and slid it back toward my father. I do not expedite fraud. Richard. The word hung in the humid air of the restaurant. Fraud? As a financial risk auditor, that word is the cornerstone of my daily life. It is the red flag that ruins careers. Hearing it directed at my own brother felt surreal, yet entirely inevitable. When an applicant claims they have the liquid capital to launch a $2 million restaurant, my department verifies the origin of those funds, Julian stated. Tyler submitted 3 months of bank statements to prove his liquidity. The routing numbers were accurate. The cash balance was impressive. There was just one glaring issue. Julian looked at me. I kept my face blank, channeling every ounce of my professional training. I knew the numbers. I always tracked the numbers. The accounts submitted in the disclosure packet do not belong to Tyler. Julian said, the primary checking and savings accounts are registered under Chloe Sterling. Tyler submitted my fiancé's personal financial records, altered the cover sheets, and presented her assets as his own to secure corporate backing. My mother gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. She looked at Tyler, but not with disappointment. She looked at him with the panic of a co-conspirator caught in a trap. That is a federal offense. Julian noted calmly, it constitutes wire fraud and identity theft. My father slammed his hand on the table. The crystal water glasses rattled, spilling ice onto the linen. Now listen here. We are a family. That wedding trust was family money. Tyler had every right to show those assets to get his business approved. We authorized him to use those records to get his venture off the ground. There is no theft happening here. You do not own Chloe's identity. Julian replied. His voice dropped an octave, carrying a chilling authority that made my father shrink back. You were the custodians of a specific trust, which you drained. But the accounts Tyler submitted were Chloe's personal earnings from her auditing career. You handed your son her private routing numbers, and he forged the financial declarations. It was just to get the foot in the door. Tyler stammered. The arrogant golden boy facade shattered into a million pieces. Once the restaurant opens, the cash flow covers everything. It is standard business practice. You just bend the rules to secure the initial capital. Everyone does it. In my line of work, bending the rules is called a liability, Julian said. He picked up his phone. He opened his corporate email application. I flagged the application for review yesterday, Julian said, his thumb hovering over the send button. But considering the applicant just confessed to submitting forged documents in front of the Vice President of Risk Control, the review is no longer necessary. He pressed the button. The screen flashed a confirmation message. I just formally rejected the franchise application, Julian announced. Avalon Hotels will not be doing business with you, Tyler. Furthermore, per corporate policy regarding fraudulent applicants, your $50,000 wedding deposit at the Avalon Grand is now frozen pending an internal legal investigation. You cannot do that. My mother shrieked. She ignored the stares from adjacent tables, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. The wedding is in 4 weeks. The invitations are sent. Maya's family is flying in from Atlanta. You are ruining your brother's life over a technicality. Tyler kicked his chair back. It crashed onto the hardwood floor with a loud bang. He lunged across the table, knocking over a bread basket and a wine glass. The red liquid stained the white tablecloth like blood. His face twisted in a desperate rage. You arrogant piece of trash, Tyler snarled. He pointed a trembling finger at Julian. Unfreeze that money right now. I will ruin you. I will call your superiors and get you fired. Julian remained seated, unflinching, watching Tyler thrash like a fish caught in a net. You are welcome to try. Security protocols are already in motion. My parents rushed to pull Tyler back, creating a humiliating spectacle in the middle of a luxury dining room. My mother turned her tear-streaked face toward me, preparing to launch the guilt trip she had perfected over 3 decades. She opened her mouth to demand I fix this, to demand I sacrifice my dignity and my finances to save her golden child one more time. She expected me to fold, just like I always did when we were younger. But I beat her to it. I picked up my purse, standing tall. The time for being the quiet shadow was over. The time for absorbing their collateral damage had ended. I had my own revelation to deliver, and it involved the brilliant woman Tyler was about to marry. Maya deserved the truth, and I was going to make sure she heard every single detail. The red wine seeped into the white linen tablecloth like a spreading stain of guilt. The jazz music playing from the hidden speakers above seemed to mock the heavy silence settling over our booth. My mother began to weep. It was a flawless performance. She pressed a pristine cloth napkin to her eyes, while her shoulders executed a synchronized tremble. This was her signature maneuver whenever the harsh spotlight of accountability swung toward her favorite child. She always weaponized her emotions to derail the conversation. "Chloe?" she gasped, reaching her hand across the table as if trying to bridge the sudden canyon between us. "How can you do this? He is your brother. Are you going to ruin his future over some selfish jealousy?" Jealousy. I tasted the word on my tongue. It was bitter but deeply familiar. I did not blink. I studied her face, noting the distinct lack of actual tears beneath her expensive mascara. This was the exact playbook they used to govern my entire childhood. In their household, my achievements were treated as baseline expectations. I was supposed to be quiet, successful, and self-sustaining. Tyler, however, was permitted to fail repeatedly, and his failures were treated as communal tragedies requiring my immediate sacrifice. I thought about a sunny morning in May, 8 years ago. I sat in a crowded university stadium wearing a heavy black cap and gown. I was graduating with honors. I had earned a full academic scholarship. Throughout the ceremony, I kept glancing at the double doors at the back of the arena, waiting for my parents to arrive. They never walked through those doors. While the university dean handed me my diploma, my father was standing in a dingy police precinct processing bail paperwork. Tyler had crashed his leased sports car into a municipal utility pole after downing numerous tequila shots. I celebrated my honors degree by eating cold takeout alone in my dorm room, while my parents coddled my brother and blamed the wet asphalt for his drunk driving arrest. I pulled myself back to the present. I looked at my mother, letting the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably in her leather seat. "I am not jealous of a fraud, Mom," I said. My voice was remarkably even. I sounded exactly like I do when reading a quarterly variance report to a board of directors. Clinical, unbothered, factual. My parents were not used to this tone from me. They expected compliance or quiet resentment. They did not expect an audit. Let us discuss the timeline. I continued, keeping my posture straight. Grandfather established that wedding fund specifically for me. He knew exactly who you both were. He recognized your inability to manage finances long before he passed away. That is why he structured the accounts with a strict disbursement condition. You and Dad were merely custodians. The fiduciary control automatically transfers to me upon my 30th birthday. My father loosened his silk tie. He looked around the dining room, his eyes darting toward the neighboring tables, desperate to see if anyone in his social circle was listening to this humiliation. "Keep your voice down, Chloe," he muttered, his authoritative facade crumbling into sheer panic. "People are trying to eat. My 30th birthday is next Wednesday," I stated, ignoring his attempt to silence me. "You did not just borrow money. You calculated the exact window to drain the trust before you legally lost access to it. You stole it 7 days before the deadline. That is not a mistake. That is premeditated theft." Tyler slammed his fists on the table. The silverware clattered against the plates. He pointed a trembling finger at Julian. "You set me up," Tyler snarled. "You played dirty. You audited my franchise file just to humiliate me in front of them." Julian did not move a single muscle. He sat beside me, emanating a quiet, formidable power. He adjusted his watch cuff with a slow, deliberate motion. "I audit liabilities, Tyler," Julian said. His voice was smooth and unforgiving. "You just happen to be a very expensive one." My mother tried to intervene again, shifting her tactics from anger back to desperation. "Chloe, please listen to reason. Your brother needs this restaurant. He needs to show his investors that he has capital. We plan to pay you back eventually. We just needed the cash right now to secure the venue and the branding rights. We are family. Family helps family." I reached into my handbag. I pulled out my wallet and extracted a crisp $100 bill. I dropped it onto the table. It landed near the spilled wine, soaking up a few crimson drops along the edge. "That covers my sparkling water," I said. "I do not owe this table another dime." I stood up and slung my trench coat over my arm. I looked down at the 3 people who had spent my entire life convincing me I was the supporting cast in their endless drama. They looked small now, stripped of their leverage. They were just 3 individuals, drowning in the consequences of their own deception. "You have 48 hours to return the $80,000 to my account," I declared. "Plus interest." My father shook his head vigorously. "Chloe, be reasonable. The money is tied up in vendor deposits and licensing fees. We cannot just liquidate those assets overnight. We need time." I leaned in closer. The air between us felt razor thin. "If that balance does not appear in my ledger by Friday morning, I will not just go to the authorities with the forged routing numbers. I will not just let Julian handle the franchise fraud through his corporate legal team." I paused, making sure I had their undivided attention. "I will go straight to Maya." The name hit Tyler like a physical blow. The color vanished from his face, leaving his skin an ashen gray. His knees seemed to give out beneath the table. He collapsed back into his chair, the fight leaving his body instantly. Maya was not a woman who tolerated deception. She was a rising star in neurosurgery, a brilliant and principled woman who had spent years building an impeccable reputation. Tyler had spent the last 2 years crafting an elaborate illusion to win her over. He presented himself as a self-made entrepreneur, a man of ambition and independent wealth. He needed her prestige to validate his own ego. He needed her pristine credit score and her medical salary to sustain the lifestyle he felt entitled to. If Maya found out her future husband was a broke fraudster facing felony charges, she would not hesitate. She would cancel the wedding before her next surgical scrub. Tyler knew this. My parents knew this. Maya was their golden ticket to social elevation, and I was holding the match near the fuse. Tyler stared at the floor, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. "Please," he whispered, the arrogance entirely stripped from his voice. "Please do not tell Maya." I did not answer him. I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit of the restaurant. Julian followed close behind, his presence a steady anchor in the storm I had just unleashed. The maitre d' held the door open for us, offering a polite evening greeting that felt worlds away from the wreckage we left at the table. We stepped out into the chilly Chicago night air. The city lights blurred against the dark sky. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of liberation. I had finally drawn the line. I had finally stopped paying for their mistakes. But as Julian signaled for the valet to bring our car around, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a frantic text message from my mother begging for mercy. Instead, it was an automated alert from my primary banking application. The notification on my screen made my heart skip a beat. The chill in the air suddenly felt much sharper. I had given my parents 48 hours to fix their mess, but looking at the digital alert flashing on my screen, I realized they had been much busier than I originally calculated. They had not just stolen my grandfather's wedding fund. They had used my personal information to orchestrate a financial disaster far deeper than $80,000, a disaster that was designed to anchor me to their debt forever. The notification from my banking application the previous night guaranteed I would not sleep. I spent the early morning hours sitting at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, drafting a systematic plan of attack. I emailed my firm to request a personal day off. By 8:50 in the morning, I was standing outside the heavy glass doors of First Trust Fidelity in downtown Chicago. The morning wind coming off Lake Michigan was sharp and biting, but I did not feel the cold. I felt nothing but a singular, calculating focus. I walked into the lobby the moment the security guard unlocked the entrance. My heels struck the polished marble floor in a steady, relentless rhythm. I bypassed the standard teller line and walked directly toward the glass-enclosed office of the branch manager. His brass nameplate read, "Gregory Lawson." He looked up from his morning coffee, wearing the relaxed and easy expression of a man who expects his day to consist of approving minor auto loans and shaking hands with local business owners. He did not expect a corporate financial risk auditor carrying a leather briefcase and a specific grievance. I sat in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk before he could stand up to offer it. I placed my driver license and my passport on the polished wood between us. I told him I needed the complete transaction history, the authorization forms, and the disbursement records for the generational trust ending in 4822. My voice held the exact pitch and cadence I use when interrogating corporate embezzlement suspects. Gregory Lawson offered a patronizing and wary smile. He interlaced his fingers and leaned back in his chair. He told me he understood I might have concerns about the trust, but those accounts required dual authorization from the primary custodians. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the edge of his desk. I informed him that the primary custodians executed a wire transfer of $80,000 precisely 7 days prior to the beneficiary maturation date. I told him I was the beneficiary. I also informed him I was a certified risk auditor. I made it clear that if he did not pull those authorization forms right then, I would have federal banking regulators investigating his branch for facilitating custodial fraud before his lunch break. The patronizing smile vanished from his face. His posture went rigid. He swallowed hard and began tapping furiously on his keyboard. A printer in the corner of his office hummed to life. He gathered a stack of papers and handed them across the desk. I scrutinized the authorization forms. My parents had indeed signed the release. The justification listed on the bank document was educational expenses. This was a blatant fabrication. Tyler had dropped out of his business management program 3 years ago. The routing number destination was a commercial holding account registered to my brother. The bank had approved a massive wire transfer without verifying the educational claim. I highlighted the discrepancy with a red pen from my purse. I slid the paper back toward him. I told him his branch failed to perform basic due diligence and the bank was now liable for an unauthorized transfer. Gregory began to sweat. Small beads of moisture formed along his hairline. He stammered a frantic apology about trusting long-standing clients. My parents had banked at this branch for decades. They relied on that comfortable familiarity to bypass standard security protocols. My instincts told me to keep digging. Fraud is rarely an isolated incident. When people cross a moral boundary, they usually leave a trail of collateral damage in their wake. I instructed Gregory to pull up my entire profile. I wanted to see every checking account, every savings account, every line of credit, and every liability attached to my Social Security number. He hesitated, his eyes darting toward the door. I commanded him to do it. The keystrokes echoed loudly in the quiet office. He turned the monitor slightly so I could see the screen. I scanned the digital list. My checking account was normal. My savings account was untouched. My car loan showed a zero balance. Then my eyes caught a line item that made the blood run freezing cold in my veins. Under the liabilities section sat an active home equity line of credit. It was a second mortgage taken out on my parents' suburban property in Oak Park. The principal amount was $300,000. The origination date was 6 months ago. My Social Security number was listed as the primary guarantor. I told Gregory to print the origination documents. My voice was a hollow whisper. He looked at the screen and his face drained of color as he realized the magnitude of the legal disaster sitting on his desk. He printed the file and handed it over with trembling fingers. I stared at the signature line on the last page. There was my name signed in a cursive loop that vaguely resembled my handwriting, but lacked the sharp angles I always use on legal and financial documents. My parents had not just stolen my wedding fund. They had forged my signature to secure a $300,000 loan. They needed my pristine credit score because their own was ruined by years of funding the constant failures of their golden child. They chained me to their debt. If they defaulted on that loan, the bank would seize my assets. My wages would be garnished. My career in finance would be destroyed. They sold my future to finance the illusion of wealth for Tyler. This was no longer a case of toxic family favoritism or bad parenting. This was a severe felony. Identity theft. Bank fraud. My parents had crossed the line from manipulative relatives to federal criminals. The simmering anger inside me burned away entirely, leaving behind a razor-sharp clarity. I looked at Gregory. He was wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. I told him I needed certified copies of every single page. I ordered him to initiate a fraud packet immediately. I demanded he freeze all lines of credit associated with my Social Security number and note in the banking system that the guarantor's signature on the mortgage was forged. He complied without a single word of protest. He knew his career was on the line for allowing a forged document to pass through his branch. I watched him stamp the copies with official ink. I gathered the evidence and locked it securely into my leather briefcase. I walked out of the bank and stepped into the bright Chicago daylight. The city felt different to me now. The invisible strings my family had used to control me through guilt and obligation were severed. I held the scissors. My phone vibrated in my trench coat pocket. I pulled it out. The screen displayed a text message from Maya. Maya is Tyler's fiancé. She is a brilliant African-American neurosurgeon working at a prestigious research hospital. She is a woman of formidable intellect, deep personal integrity, and she has zero tolerance for nonsense. Tyler had spent 2 years pretending to be a highly successful entrepreneur to match her prestige. He wore tailored suits he bought on credit and leased sports cars to convince her he was her equal. Maya texted me directly. She wrote, "Chloe, the wedding invitation Tyler said he mailed you was just returned to our apartment by the postal service. The address he wrote on the envelope does not even exist. Can you stop by the hospital cafeteria to see me for a bit? I stared at the message. Tyler had never invited me to his wedding. He deliberately wrote a fake address so the invitation would bounce back in the mail. This allowed him to play the victim and tell Maya that I cruelly refused to attend his special day. He was spinning intricate webs of lies to cover his tracks. He thought he was so clever. He thought I would stay quiet and absorb the blame just to keep the peace, just like I had done since childhood. I typed my reply. I told her I would be there in 20 minutes. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket and gripped the handle of my briefcase. The second bomb was armed and ready to detonate. I booked a direct flight out of Chicago within an hour of leaving the bank manager office. My mind operated like a chessboard, calculating moves and countermoves. I needed to reach Baltimore before my parents could spin a fabricated narrative to control the damage. 2 hours later, I stepped out of a cab onto the bustling pavement. The air was thick and humid, a sharp contrast to the freezing wind of Lake Michigan. I found a quiet corner booth at a cafe directly across the street from Johns Hopkins Hospital. The smell of roasted espresso beans mixed with the faint scent of medical antiseptic clinging to the doctors and nurses grabbing their midday caffeine. I ordered a black coffee and waited. I needed to dismantle my brother's illusion before he could anchor himself to an innocent woman. Maya walked through the glass doors 15 minutes later. She wore navy blue surgical scrubs and comfortable running shoes. A pristine white coat hung draped over her arm. Her hospital identification badge clipped to her collar displayed her credentials. She is an African-American neurosurgeon, a woman who fought through grueling residencies and relentless competition to secure her position at a prestigious medical institution. She radiated a quiet, formidable intelligence. Even exhausted from a demanding surgical shift, she carried herself with undeniable dignity. She relies on precision, intellect, and an unbreakable work ethic. She built her life on merit. My brother built his on a foundation of stolen money and borrowed prestige. She spotted me in the corner booth and offered a warm, welcoming smile. She sat down across from me and ordered a green tea. She reached into her leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. She placed the returned wedding invitation on the wooden table between us. The Postal Service sticker marked it as Return to Sender. Maya looked genuinely distressed. She apologized, assuming my absence was the result of a bitter family disagreement over wedding planning. She thought I was simply refusing to attend because of typical sibling rivalry. Maya explained that my parents were insisting on an extravagant country club wedding. They demanded ice sculptures, imported floral arrangements hanging from the ceiling, and a 6-course plated dinner for 300 guests. She admitted the sheer scale of the event made her highly uncomfortable. She preferred a smaller, elegant ceremony, but Tyler waved off all her concerns. He told her he hit a highly lucrative streak in the cryptocurrency market. He claimed his digital investments paid off tenfold, providing enough liquid cash to cover the lavish wedding and simultaneously launch his luxury restaurant franchise in Chicago. I listened to her recount my brother's fairy tale without interrupting. I pictured Tyler scrolling through fake trading applications on his phone, pretending to monitor digital markets while actually spending my grandfather's trust fund. I knew the truth behind every expensive dinner he bought her and every designer suit he wore. I opened my leather briefcase. I bypassed the small talk. I pulled out the thick manila folder containing the certified documents from First Trust Fidelity. I placed the printed franchise rejection email from Avalon Hotels right on top. I slid the entire stack across the small wooden table. I looked her straight in the eyes. I kept my voice steady and professional. I told her I respected her too much to let her sign a marriage license funded by stolen money and federal fraud. Maya frowned slightly, her brow furrowing in confusion. She unclasped the folder. She pulled out the first document. It was the bank transfer authorization my parents used to drain the wedding trust. Her eyes scanned the withdrawal amount and the destination routing numbers. Then she moved to the Avalon franchise application. I watched the transformation happen in real time. Maya spends her life operating on the human brain. She is trained to spot microscopic anomalies, to remain devoid of panic when a vital sign monitor blips, and to excise diseased tissue with cold precision. She applied that exact same clinical detachment to the financial papers sitting in front of her. The warm, supportive fiancé vanished. The surgeon took over. I walked her through the paperwork step by step. I pointed to the forged signature on the $300,000 home equity line of credit. I showed her the glaring differences between my actual signature and the clumsy imitation my parents drew on the dotted line. I directed her attention to the altered financial disclosure forms Tyler submitted to Julian's corporate office. I laid out the timeline, proving that the cryptocurrency investment was a fabricated smokescreen designed to hide the theft of a family trust. Then I handed her a copy of Tyler's official university transcripts. He had told Maya he held a master's degree in business administration from a top-tier university. The official transcript clearly showed he dropped out during his sophomore year with failing grades in basic accounting and marketing. He possessed no degree, no business acumen, and no legitimate wealth. I explained how Tyler likely managed his daily deception. I asked her if he frequently took urgent business calls during their dinners, pacing the room and speaking loudly about profit margins and supply chain logistics. Maya nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. I told her those calls were performances. He was likely talking to my father or a customer service representative regarding a delayed shipment of luxury shoes he bought with my credit. I asked her if my parents constantly praised her during family visits, acting overly accommodating while simultaneously pressuring her to upgrade the wedding venue. She nodded again. I explained that their flattery was a calculated investment. They paraded her around their social circles to boost their own status, viewing her surgical credentials as a trophy they had somehow earned. They needed her to sign that marriage license before the facade crumbled. Once she was legally bound to him, his debt would become her problem. Her salary would pay off the forged home equity line of credit. Her pristine credit score would be used to finance his next failed venture. My parents did not view Maya as a future daughter-in-law. They viewed her as a host organism for their son. Maya did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not create a scene in the middle of the crowded cafe. The gentle demeanor she brought into the room evaporated, replaced by an aura of freezing. Hardened steel. Her posture stiffened. Her dark eyes turned to obsidian. The realization washed over her with crushing weight. The man she was planning to marry in 4 weeks was a phantom. His wealth was stolen. His education was a lie. His business was an elaborate scam. He had hijacked my identity to fund a grand illusion, all to secure a marriage to a woman vastly out of his league. Maya absorbed this information without flinching. The betrayal ran so deep, it bypassed sorrow and went straight to a profound, chilling wrath. She is a woman who saves lives for a living, and she had just realized she needed to save her own. Maya slowly aligned the edges of the papers. She tapped the stack against the table, making sure every page was perfectly straight. She placed them back into the manila folder. She wrapped the string around the closure clasp with deliberate, measured movements. She placed the folder inside her leather tote bag, right next to her hospital stethoscope. When she looked back up at me, the air around her felt terrifyingly cold. The initial shock of betrayal had metabolized into pure, refined anger. A self-made woman who fought for every inch of her success had just discovered she was being used as a retirement plan by a family of con artists. She was not a victim mourning a lost relationship. She was a professional evaluating a liability that needed to be surgically removed. Maya finished her green tea. She stood up, draping her pristine white coat over her arm. She looked down at me, her expression unreadable. She told me she had a formal rehearsal dinner scheduled for this Friday evening at the Ritz-Carlton back in Chicago. The entire wedding party, the investors, and my parents would be in attendance. She requested that Julian and I attend the dinner. She stated she had a special surprise planned for my family, and she wanted me to have a front row seat. The flight back to Chicago gave me ample time to prepare for the inevitable fallout. When you dismantle an illusion that a family has spent decades building, you do not expect a quiet surrender. You expect collateral damage. By Thursday afternoon, Maya had clearly initiated her own confrontation with Tyler. I knew this because my desk phone at the corporate auditing firm rang at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. It was the head of building security. He informed me that two individuals claiming to be my parents were creating a severe disturbance in the main lobby, demanding immediate access to the Human Resources Department. They were launching a desperate counteroffensive. Their logic was transparent and exceptionally vicious. For a certified financial risk auditor, reputation is the only currency that matters. My career depends on unimpeachable ethics, strict compliance, and rigorous data security. If my parents could cast a shadow of doubt on my professional integrity, they could trigger an internal corporate investigation. They wanted my firm to believe I was a rogue employee. They hoped that by threatening my livelihood, I would panic, retract my fraud allegations, and submit to their demands to save my job. They intended to discredit the witness to protect the criminal. I stood up from my desk. I smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored pencil skirt. I did not take the elevator down to the lobby alone. I walked down the executive corridor and knocked on the glass door of our chief legal counsel, Marcus Sterling. I also sent a brief message to Derek, our director of corporate security, a man who spent 15 years running federal task forces before moving to the private sector. I explained the situation in 3 concise sentences. They flanked me as we descended to the ground floor. The main atrium of my firm is designed to project silent authority. It features imported gray marble, towering glass panels, and a security checkpoint requiring biometric authentication. It is a sterile, unforgiving environment. My parents looked entirely out of place standing in the center of it. My father, a man who usually curated his country club appearance with meticulous care, looked unhinged. His tie hung loose around his neck. His suit jacket was wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He was jabbing his finger toward the stoic receptionist, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. My mother stood slightly behind him. She gripped her designer handbag tightly against her chest, her face a rigid mask of manufactured righteous indignation. I swiped my badge and stepped through the electronic turnstile. My father spotted me, his face contorted with a volatile mixture of fear and rage. He took a heavy step forward, raising his voice so every passing executive and visiting client could hear his fabricated narrative. "There she is," my father bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "I want the head of human resources down here, right now. She is a corporate thief. She abused her high-level security clearance to illegally harvest our private family banking records. She is weaponizing stolen financial data to ruin her own brother out of petty, vindictive jealousy." It was a calculated performance designed to incite panic. In a less secure environment, an employer might have hastily suspended me just to mitigate the public relations risk. But my father forgot a crucial detail. I do not work at a neighborhood tax preparation office. I work for an international risk management conglomerate. We investigate corporate espionage and dismantle offshore embezzlement rings for global corporations. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands in defense or offer a frantic explanation to the onlookers. I stood my ground, observing him with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a predictable reaction under a microscope. "You're making a profound tactical error, Richard," I said. My voice was calm, carrying just enough volume to slice through his shouting. He blinked, thrown off balance by the use of his first name. "You are standing on private corporate property," I continued, keeping my tone perfectly level. "You are shouting defamatory accusations under the lens of 12 high-definition audio-visual surveillance cameras. And you are doing so directly in front of our Director of Security and our Chief Legal Counsel." Marcus stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He handed my father a crisp white business card. "Sir, if you wish to file a formal grievance, our legal department will gladly accept it in writing. However, Any further verbal allegations made in this lobby that threaten the professional standing and licensure of my senior auditor will be met with an immediate and relentless defamation lawsuit. We protect our personnel. My father froze. His hand hovered in the air, hesitant to take the business card. The bluster began to evaporate from his posture. He was a man accustomed to bullying local contractors and manipulating guilt-ridden family members. He was utterly unequipped to handle corporate litigators who viewed threats as actionable offenses. I stepped closer to the glass security barrier. The air between us felt brittle. I did not utilize any corporate software to access my own financial accounts. I stated. I walked into the branch manager office at First Trust Fidelity. I instructed them to pull the origination documents for the home equity line of credit you secured 6 months ago. My mother let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. She clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening in sheer terror. The document bearing my forged signature as the primary guarantor has been compiled into a comprehensive fraud packet. I informed them. It was transmitted to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation this morning. My father staggered backward, as if he had been struck in the chest. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The reality of his situation finally pierced his delusion. The false narrative he had constructed to protect Tyler was collapsing under the weight of federal law. You should not be standing in my lobby, attempting to sabotage my career, I told him, holding his terrified gaze. You should be sitting in your living room liquidating your assets to hire a criminal defense attorney. The prospect of federal prison broke my mother. Her carefully maintained facade shattered entirely. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the cold marble floor of the atrium. She began to wail. It was a loud, theatrical sobbing, the kind of public meltdown she usually utilized to force compliance from those around her. Chloe, please, she cried out, reaching her hands toward the turnstiles. We are your parents. We raised you. You cannot send us to a jail cell. Tyler just made a miscalculation. We were only trying to help him secure his future. Please tell them to drop the investigation. We will fix it. In the past, those tears would have acted as a command. I would have rushed forward to comfort her, absorbing the blame and silencing my own needs just to stop the public spectacle. I would have sacrificed my peace to preserve their comfort. Standing in the lobby, I looked down at her and felt a profound, settling emptiness. There was no anger left. There was only the quiet recognition of a transaction finalizing. Derek, the security director, gestured silently to his team. 2 guards in dark suits stepped forward with practiced efficiency. They did not show pity. They approached my mother and lifted her by her elbows, hoisting her to her feet with firm, clinical precision. They guided my father by the shoulder, steering him away from the security gates. It is time for you to vacate the premises, Derek instructed them. His voice left no room for negotiation. If you return to this property, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. My parents did not fight the guards. The fight had been entirely drained from them. They were escorted across the vast expanse of the lobby. I stood motionless, watching them walk toward the exit. My mother looked back over her shoulder one last time, her face streaked with ruined makeup, searching for a hint of mercy in my expression. She found none. They were ushered out onto the bustling Chicago pavement. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind them. The mechanical click of the electronic lock echoed faintly through the quiet atrium. That sound marked the end of an era. The final, frayed thread of my familial obligation was severed. I turned around and walked back toward the elevators with Marcus and Derek. I needed to finish my compliance reports. I had a rehearsal dinner to attend the following evening, and I intended to enjoy every single moment of it. While I stood in the sterile marble lobby of my auditing firm, watching security escort my parents out into the biting Chicago wind, my fiancé was orchestrating a masterclass in corporate dismantling just 3 miles away. Julian operates within the highest echelons of the Avalon Hotel Group. His corner office on the 42nd floor overlooks the sprawling urban skyline. reflecting a man who thrives on order, protocol, and precision. He did not need to raise his voice or summon armed guards to exert his influence. He only needed a keyboard, a secure server, and a documented chain of evidence. Julian is not a man who inherited his position. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the South Side, funding his own education through an Ivy League business and law program by working overnight shifts. He possesses a deep, fundamental disdain for nepotism and unearned entitlement. Tyler represented everything Julian despised. My brother was a hollow shell of a man wearing tailored suits bought on credit, relying on familial theft to manufacture a facade of entrepreneurial brilliance. Julian viewed my brother not just as a personal nuisance, but as a dangerous liability to a multinational hospitality brand. Inside the soundproof glass walls of the Avalon Executive Boardroom, Julian convened a priority briefing with the corporate legal counsel and the chief financial officer. He bypassed pleasantries and projected the digital footprint of my brother directly onto the presentation screen. Julian systematically walked the board members through the manipulated routing numbers, the altered asset declarations, and the forged liquidity statements Tyler had submitted to secure the luxury restaurant franchise. Tyler had not merely lied to a relative during a Sunday dinner. He had transmitted fabricated financial documents across state lines in a deliberate attempt to defraud a publicly traded corporation. Julian explained the severe risk of allowing an unverified, financially insolvent applicant to brandish the prestigious Avalon name. He detailed how my brother planned to use the restaurant launch to secure further illicit funding. The board consensus was swift, decisive, and unforgiving. The corporation moved far past simply rejecting the pending franchise application. They triggered a defensive legal protocol designed to crush fraudulent actors. Avalon compliance attorneys immediately drafted a formal complaint. The $50,000 deposit Tyler had placed for his lavish grand ballroom wedding reception was seized. It was no longer classified as a party reservation. It was now designated as material evidence of illicit wire transfers. The funds were locked into an inaccessible corporate escrow account, pending the outcome of an internal investigation and an impending civil lawsuit for damages and breach of good faith. Tyler discovered the trap shortly after lunch. He attempted to log in to the Avalon vendor portal to check his venue arrangements, only to find his credentials revoked and his digital access permanently terminated. His panic materialized through technology. Over the course of 2 hours, my brother dialed Julian 14 separate times. I met Julian at our apartment later that evening. The city lights illuminated our minimalist living room as he placed his phone on the dark granite kitchen island. He showed me the extensive call log. The progression of my brother unraveling was clearly visible in the frantic frequency of the incoming numbers. The timeline told a story of a man watching his carefully constructed house of cards catch fire. Julian poured us both a glass of red wine. He remained remarkably serene. He leaned against the counter and explained how the voicemails evolved. The first few messages were dripping with arrogance. Tyler demanded to know why the system was glitching, adopting the tone of a VIP client inconvenienced by a minor clerical error. By the 5th call, the arrogance fractured into confusion. He asked if Julian was playing some sort of petty prank. By the 10th call, the confusion morphed into unhinged rage. Tyler screamed into the receiver, threatening to hire ruthless litigators to sue Avalon for breach of contract. But a man drowning in debt cannot afford ruthless litigators. By the 14th call, reality had crushed the last remnants of his pride. Julian pressed the play icon on the final voicemail. The audio echoed through our quiet kitchen. Tyler sounded unrecognizable. The polished, charismatic persona he used to charm my parents and deceive his fiancé was entirely gone. He was replaced by a frantic, breathless coward. "Julian, please," my brother begged through the small speaker, his voice cracking with desperation. "You have to listen to me. Just unfreeze the wedding deposit. Let the venue booking go through. I will make my parents sell their house. I will force them to liquidate their retirement accounts to pay Chloe back every single dime. Just do not let Maya know. I need that money for the reception. Please. Man, do not ruin this for me. The audio recording hung in the air, dripping with a profound, sickening irony. Tyler was the golden child. My parents had sacrificed my financial security, risked federal prison, and destroyed their relationship with me just to elevate him. They worshipped the ground he walked on. Yet, the moment his own illusion was threatened, Tyler did not hesitate to throw his creators directly into the fire. He was perfectly willing to render his own parents homeless and destitute just to maintain his fragile ego in front of a woman he was actively deceiving. Julian reached out and tapped the screen. The message vanished into the digital trash bin. He picked up his wine glass, taking a slow, measured sip. He looked at me, his expression harboring a calm, lethal certainty. Weak men always use others as shields. Julian noted. His voice was a quiet rumble in the stillness of our apartment. He is willing to throw his parents out onto the street just to keep up appearances for a few more weeks. He has no loyalty to anyone but his own reflection. I stared at the phone, feeling a strange mix of vindication and disgust. My parents had traded my future for a son who viewed them as nothing more than a disposable line of credit. They had engineered their own demise. While we stood in our kitchen, the final mechanism of corporate retaliation was already in motion. Before midnight, a specialized legal courier arrived at the luxury high-rise where Tyler leased his apartment. The messenger bypassed the concierge desk and rode the elevator to the premium tier. He knocked on the heavy oak door. Tyler opened it, wearing an expensive silk robe purchased with my stolen funds. The courier handed my brother a thick, sealed envelope bearing the imposing Avalon legal insignia. It required a physical signature for receipt. It contained the formal notice of franchise contract termination, a notification of the seized wedding deposit, and a preliminary demand for institutional compensation regarding the fraudulent application process. The golden boy was officially buried under an avalanche of corporate litigation. He had no venue, no franchise, and no money. His parents were facing an FBI probe, and his safety net was burned to ashes. He was cornered, desperate, and running out of time. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the very next evening, and the pressure was about to force his enablers to make a highly irrational move. They were losing control, which meant they were going to seek out allies to guilt me into submission. Friday morning arrived with the digital onslaught I fully anticipated. My phone screen illuminated my dark bedroom like a dispatch center terminal. I had 52 new notifications before I even poured my first cup of coffee. The extended family network had been mobilized overnight. My parents, barred from my corporate office and terrified of impending federal charges, resorted to the oldest and most predictable tactic in their arsenal. They deployed their proxies. My phone vibrated relentlessly on the kitchen counter. Uncles, cousins, and distant relatives who normally only reached out during the holidays were suddenly deeply invested in my moral compass. They left long voicemails dripping with manufactured concern. They sent extensive text messages urging forgiveness and unity. Cousin David sent a paragraph about loyalty. Aunt Sarah left a weeping audio message begging me to reconsider my harsh actions. In highly dysfunctional ecosystems, the truth is treated as a lethal threat to the status quo. The members who demand you keep the peace are usually the ones who benefit the most from your silence. They do not want genuine resolution. They want you to return to your assigned role so they do not have to confront the rot hidden underneath the floorboards. I ignored every single message. I needed caffeine before heading to the office to finalize my weekly compliance reports. I walked 3 blocks from my apartment to a local artisanal roastery. The morning air was crisp and unforgiving. The pavement remained slick from a brief overnight rainstorm. I stepped inside the cafe, greeted by the heavy aroma of dark roast espresso and toasted pastries. I ordered a black iced coffee. I turned around to find a familiar figure blocking my path to the exit. Aunt Brenda. She is my mother's older sister. She wears pastel cashmere cardigans, serves on the hospitality committee at her local parish, and wields passive aggression like a finely tuned instrument. Brenda views herself as the undisputed moral authority of our bloodline. She is the designated peacemaker, which simply means she silences victims to protect abusers. Brenda flagged me down, maneuvering her way into my personal space with a practiced, sympathetic smile. She insisted we sit at a small wrought iron table on the outdoor patio. The metal chair was cold. I set my leather briefcase on the seat beside me. A server brought her a glass of tap water with a lemon wedge. I took a slow sip of my iced coffee. The ice cubes clinked softly against the plastic cup. The espresso machine hissed in the background as commuters rushed past our patio table, entirely unaware of the financial execution about to take place over morning beverages. I waited for her to initiate the performance. "Chloe," she began, leaning across the table. She attempted to place her hand over mine. I subtly pulled my hand back, resting it securely on my lap. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she quickly recovered. "Your mother called me last night in absolute hysterics." She could barely breathe. "What are you doing to this family?" I did not answer. My deliberate silence forced her to keep talking, compelling her to fill the void with her rehearsed script. "You are threatening to send your own parents to a holding cell over a trivial financial misunderstanding," Brenda continued. Her tone shifted from artificial sorrow to a gentle, patronizing reprimand. "Tyler is your younger brother. He is getting married. He just wanted to look successful for his bride. He made a foolish choice, but he is young and ambitious. You are the older sister. You have always been so rigid, so focused on the rules. Everything is a spreadsheet to you. You should be guiding him, not ruining his life just because you feel a little neglected." She leaned closer, lowering her voice as if imparting ancient, sacred wisdom. "Money can always be earned back. Chloe, blood cannot. You will regret throwing your relatives away for a bank account. A wedding fund is just cash. Family is forever. You need to drop these ridiculous charges. Call off the lawyers, and apologize to your mother for causing such a terrifying scene at your workplace." I let her finish her sermon. I watched the condensation form on the outside of my plastic cup. I stirred the ice cubes again. The rhythmic sound was the only noise between us. I unclasped the brass lock of my leather briefcase. When I audited my parents' forged home equity loan at the bank yesterday, I did not limit my investigation to my own social security number. A thorough risk auditor maps the entire financial network to identify the full scope of the liability. I pulled out a thin, navy blue folder. I placed it squarely on the wrought iron table. "You are correct about one crucial detail, Brenda," I said. My volume remained conversational, blending in seamlessly with the ambient noise of the street traffic. "Money is just math, but let us discuss your specific math." Brenda blinked. Her posture stiffened. She looked at the blue folder as if it were a dormant explosive device. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice losing its soothing cadence. "I am trying to save your relationship with your parents." I opened the folder. "Last October, you complained to the entire extended family that you lost a significant portion of your retirement savings. You told everyone at the Thanksgiving dinner table that it was a volatile mutual fund. You said my father, who acts as your informal financial advisor, told you to ride out the market dip and wait for the portfolio to recover." Brenda shifted uncomfortably in her metal chair. "Richard manages my portfolio as a favor," she stated defensively. Her blind loyalty to the family hierarchy prevented her from seeing the truth right in front of her. The market was unpredictable. He said the tech sector took a huge hit. It was unfortunate, but economic downturns happen. The market was perfectly stable. I corrected her. "I pulled the tracing numbers on your portfolio liquidation. My father did not invest your retirement capital into a failing tech stock. He authorized a direct withdrawal of $40,000 from your primary nest egg. He transferred that exact amount into a shell-limited liability company registered under Tyler's name." The color drained from her cheeks. Her pastel cashmere cardigan suddenly looked absurd on a woman who is aging a decade per second. I slid a copy of a vehicle registration document across the table. I tapped the highlighted vehicle identification number with my index finger. Tyler did not use your retirement funds to buy stock options. I informed her. He used your money as a down payment for a slate gray Porsche sports car. He needed a luxury vehicle to convince Maya he was a cryptocurrency millionaire. My parents covered his tracks. I explained, keeping my gaze locked on her terrified eyes. They fabricated a story about a market crash to keep you quiet and compliant while your beloved nephew drove your pension around downtown Chicago. I audited the entire cash flow of this family. They bleed everyone dry to fund his illusion. Brenda stared at the highlighted routing numbers. Her hands began to tremble. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the paper as if making physical contact would render the nightmare permanent. Her breathing grew shallow and erratic. The moral high ground she had occupied just 5 minutes prior crumbled into dust. You did not intercept me this morning to be a peacemaker, I told her. My voice carried zero pity. You were dispatched by my mother to protect the illusion. I am merely showing you the price of your admission ticket. You are not the mediator here. Brenda, you are just the previous victim in their ongoing scam. Brenda grabbed the blue folder. She stood up so fast her chair scraped violently against the concrete patio. She did not say goodbye. She did not defend my mother. She did not attempt to justify my brother's ambition. She did not touch her glass of lemon water. She marched away down the sidewalk with the frantic, purposeful stride of a woman heading straight toward a war. The United Family Alliance was officially dead. They would be far too busy tearing each other apart over stolen retirement funds to focus their collective energy on me. I finished my iced coffee. I checked the time on my watch. The rehearsal dinner at the Ritz-Carlton was only 9 hours away. Tyler had just lost his primary financial enablers. His corporate support system had imploded. His funds were frozen in escrow. His bride-to-be possessed the forged documents. And she was currently preparing to host a banquet for 100 high society guests. The stage was perfectly set. It was time to go to work, finish my day, and get dressed for a party. I left the corporate auditing firm at exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip below the Chicago skyline, casting long shadows across the pavement. I navigated the rush hour pedestrian traffic with a profound sense of clarity. The morning confrontation with Aunt Brenda had neutralized the final piece of the family alliance. I walked the remaining blocks to my residential building, feeling lighter than I had in 3 decades. My luxury apartment complex features a subterranean parking facility. It is a vast cavern of gray concrete, illuminated by buzzing fluorescent tubes. The environment is usually silent, save for the occasional echo of a car engine or the squeak of rubber tires. I swiped my key fob at the secure pedestrian entrance and descended the concrete stairwell to level 3. I approached my vehicle, unlocking the doors remotely. The headlights flashed twice in the dim garage. I slid into the driver's seat, placing my leather briefcase on the passenger side. I started the ignition. The engine purred smoothly. I shifted into drive, preparing to head upstairs to change for the rehearsal dinner. That was when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar directly into the path of my headlights. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched against the polished concrete floor. My seatbelt locked hard against my chest. I stared through the windshield. Standing in the harsh glare of the halogen beams was my younger brother. He did not look like the polished golden boy who had sipped expensive wine at the steakhouse just 2 days prior. His appearance had deteriorated at an alarming rate. He wore a rumpled dress shirt, half untucked from his trousers. His silk tie was missing. His hair, usually styled with expensive pomade, hung in greasy strands across his forehead. Dark, bruised circles framed his bloodshot eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept, eaten, or stopped running since the corporate courier delivered his franchise termination notice. He marched toward my car with a frantic, staggering gait. I immediately pressed the central lock button on my door panel. The heavy mechanical click echoed inside the quiet cabin of my car. I kept my foot firmly pressed on the brake pedal. Tyler reached the driver's side door. He slammed his open palms against the reinforced glass. The sudden impact reverberated through the vehicle frame. He leaned close to the window, his breath fogging the cold glass. I could see the raw desperation twisting his features. He was no longer playing a role. The mask had burned away entirely, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, cornered animal. "Chloe?" he shouted. The thick glass muffled his voice, turning his screams into a frantic, distorted echo. "Open the door right now. I know you are in there. You have to listen to me." I did not unlock the door. I did not turn off the engine. I maintained a steady, analytical gaze, observing his meltdown with the same detachment I reserve for reviewing fraudulent balance sheets. When I refused to open the door, his panic escalated into unhinged fury. He pressed his face against the glass, his eyes wild and unfocused. "You have to drop the bank fraud charges," Tyler yelled, his voice cracking under the immense strain. "You have to call the federal investigators and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you signed those mortgage papers. And I need $20,000 in cash by tonight." I watched him demand a ransom while simultaneously begging for salvation. His entitlement was so deeply ingrained that even while drowning, he expected me to act as his life raft. I did not react. He struck the glass with the heel of his hand. "You make a six-figure salary," he screamed, his spittle hitting the window pane. "You do not even need the money. I am dead if I do not pay them back tonight." The loan sharks do not care about franchise applications. They care about their gambling debts. The final puzzle piece snapped into place. The franchise dream was a facade. The lavish wedding was a smokescreen. He had drained my grandfather's trust and forged a home equity loan, not to build a business, but to cover a catastrophic gambling addiction. He had borrowed money from dangerous people to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. And those people were now demanding their payment. His fabricated life was collapsing under the weight of predatory interest rates. I pressed the electronic control button on my armrest. The driver's side window glided down exactly 1 inch. The smell of stale alcohol and raw panic flooded into the pristine interior of my car. Tyler gripped the top edge of the window glass, his knuckles white, desperate to pry it open further. "You are going to transfer the cash," he demanded, gasping for air. "You have to save me, Chloe. Mom and Dad cannot get a loan anywhere because you froze their credit profiles." I looked at the terrified man gripping my window. I felt no sisterly affection. I felt no obligation to rescue him. "Your failure is not my responsibility," I told him. My voice was a frozen, emotionless void. "Our parents shielded you from every consequence for 27 years. They sacrificed my future to protect your ego. They built a padded room for you to live in, and you set it on fire all by yourself. The time for bailouts is over. You are going to pay the price for your own actions." I pressed the button to roll the window back up. The motor hummed, forcing his fingers to release their grip before the glass sealed shut. Tyler lost whatever fragile grip he still held on reality. His face contorted into pure malice. He stepped back, raised his clenched fist, and wound up his arm to smash the driver's side window. He intended to break the glass and drag me out of the vehicle. He wanted to use physical intimidation to force a financial transfer. He never got the chance to execute his strike. Julian possesses a brilliant tactical mind. He knows that desperate men resort to physical violence when their financial leverage is eradicated. Julian had alerted the building security team and local law enforcement the moment we discovered the extent of the bank fraud. He requested a standing watch on my residential premises. 2 uniformed police officers materialized from the shadows of the concrete pillars, flanked by the head of residential security. Before Tyler could swing his fist into my window, a heavy hand clamped down on the back of his collar. The first officer swept Tyler off his feet with practiced, overwhelming force. They slammed him face down onto the hood of my car. The loud crunch of his body hitting the metal echoed loudly across the empty parking structure. Tyler gasped. The wind knocked out of his lungs. The second officer grabbed my brother's wrists, wrenching them behind his back. The distinct, metallic click of steel handcuffs, ratcheting tight, severed the last remaining shred of his golden boy persona. He was pressed against the cold hood of my vehicle, pinned under the weight of the law, sobbing incoherently. He cried out for our mother, a grown man reverting to a child the moment he faced a real consequence. I did not step out of the car to comfort him. I did not roll down the window to offer a parting word of advice. I shifted the gear selector into reverse. I carefully backed away from the scene, giving the officers room to handle the arrest. I drove toward the exit ramp, leaving him to the authorities. I needed to head upstairs to select my dress for the rehearsal dinner. The evening was just beginning, and Maya was expecting us. The golden chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton VIP dining room cast a warm, luxurious glow over the imported white floral arrangements. A string quartet played a sophisticated classical arrangement in the corner. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with silver trays, offering premium champagne and delicate appetizers. Tyler had selected this exact venue to project an image of undeniable elite status. He had spared no expense, ordering the most expensive catering package available, secure in the delusion that my forged credit lines and my stolen trust fund would cover the extravagant bill. He wanted to prove he belonged in the same social stratosphere as his brilliant fiancé. Julian and I handed our coats to the attendant at the entrance. I wore a tailored black evening gown that signaled formal respect without drawing unnecessary attention. Julian wore a custom charcoal suit, looking entirely at ease in an environment designed to intimidate. We stepped into the sprawling ballroom. The room was populated by approximately 100 guests. The demographic divide was stark. Maya had invited her esteemed colleagues. The room was filled with prominent surgeons, hospital administrators, medical researchers, and distinguished legal professionals. They conversed in quiet, sophisticated tones, holding their glasses with the relaxed posture of people who possessed genuine, unshakable wealth and earned prestige. On the opposite side of the room, my parents stood near the head table. They looked like passengers on a sinking ship, trying to pretend their feet were not already wet. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled to begin 15 minutes ago, and the groom was conspicuously absent. My father paced behind a row of velvet chairs. He repeatedly pulled his smartphone from his jacket pocket, stared at the blank screen with mounting dread, and shoved it back into the fabric. He wiped a thin layer of sweat from his forehead. My mother stood rigidly beside him. She held a crystal champagne flute with a grip so tight, her knuckles appeared bone-white. She forced a rigid, plastic smile whenever one of Maya's colleagues walked past, but her eyes betrayed sheer, suffocating panic. They knew Tyler was missing. They did not yet know he was currently sitting in a municipal holding cell wearing steel handcuffs, but his silence was destroying their nerves. My mother scanned the crowd and spotted me walking through the grand archway with Julian. The artificial hospitality melted off her face instantly. Her features twisted into a mask of pure, concentrated hostility. She placed her glass on a passing waiter's tray and marched toward us. Her heels sank into the thick, patterned carpet. She navigated through the clusters of chatting guests with a desperate, rigid stride, determined to intercept us before we could mingle. She intended to pull me into a quiet hallway, deliver vicious threats, and force me to leave before I ruined their carefully constructed aesthetic. She closed the distance, reaching her hand out to grab my forearm. Her mouth opened, preparing to hiss a venomous command to exit the premises. Before her fingers could brush the fabric of my dress, a sharp, piercing hum of audio feedback echoed through the ballroom speakers. Everyone stopped talking. My mother froze in her tracks, her hand hovering in the air. We all turned our attention toward the elevated stage at the front of the dining room. Maya stood at the podium. She did not wear the soft ivory or pastel shades traditionally expected of a nervous, glowing bride. She wore a striking, floor-length crimson gown, the deep red fabric draped elegantly over her frame, projecting an undeniable, formidable authority. She did not look like a woman preparing for a wedding celebration. She looked like a Supreme Court judge preparing to deliver a final, devastating verdict. The ambient chatter in the room evaporated. The string quartet lowered their bows in unison. 100 faces turned toward the stage. Maya adjusted the microphone stand with a calm, deliberate motion. She surveyed the crowd. Her intelligent, dark eyes swept over her colleagues, her family, and finally settled directly on my parents standing paralyzed in the center of the room. "Thank you all for attending tonight," Maya began. Her voice resonated through the premium sound system. It was steady, resonant, and entirely devoid of sorrow. She spoke with the exact same clinical precision she used when briefing a surgical team before a complex operation. We gathered in this magnificent room to celebrate the blending of two families. We are here to toast to a future built on mutual partnership, respect, and trust. She paused. The silence in the ballroom deepened. It became heavy, pressing down on the guests. My father stopped pacing. He stared at the stage, a look of profound horror washing over his face. "However," Maya continued, her tone dropping an octave, "true partnership requires absolute honesty. Trust cannot survive when the foundation is constructed entirely on fraud." The guests exchanged confused, worried glances. A prominent cardiologist sitting near the front row slowly lowered his wineglass to the table. The atmosphere shifted from celebratory to deeply tense. "I cannot marry a man who fabricated his entire existence," Maya stated. Her words sliced through the heavy air like a scalpel. "I cannot bind my life to an individual who uses deception to compensate for his own severe inadequacies. And more importantly, I refuse to become the daughter-in-law to a family that actively condones the theft of assets from their own flesh and blood." The reaction to her statement was immediate and visceral. Somewhere in the back of the room, a heavy silver dessert fork slipped from a guest's hand. It clattered loudly against a porcelain dinner plate. That sharp, metallic noise acted as a catalyst. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Low whispers erupted across the room as brilliant, analytical minds began to process the severity of the accusation. My mother looked as though the oxygen had been vacuumed from her lungs. She stumbled backward, bumping hard against a tall cocktail table. She looked at me, then at Maya, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. Maya raised her hand, commanding silence once more. The room obeyed her instantly. She reached onto the podium and picked up the thick manila folder I had handed her at the cafe in Baltimore. She opened the clasp and pulled out the stack of financial documents. She held the papers high under the stage lighting for every person in the room to witness. "These are certified banking records and official corporate rejection notices," Maya declared, her voice ringing with undeniable conviction. "These documents prove that the groom, who is conspicuously missing from his own dinner tonight, did not earn his fortune in digital currency. He stole his wealth from a generational trust belonging to his sister. He forged legal signatures to secure fraudulent property loans to cover catastrophic gambling debts. He is a financial predator." Maya lowered the paper slightly, her gaze locking onto my father. "And his parents," Maya said, her voice dripping with profound revulsion, "not only facilitated this crime, they actively participated in the forgery to maintain his pathetic illusion of success. They sacrificed their daughter to fund a lie." The ballroom fell into a dead, chilling hush. 100 high society guests, people who built their lives on evidence and merit, stared at my parents. It was not a look of pity. It was a look of overwhelming disgust. My parents were exposed. The grand illusion they had sacrificed my future to protect was stripped away under the brightest lights possible. The silence in the room was crushing. It was the sound of a reputation being permanently annihilated. The silence following the declaration hung over the luxurious dining room like a heavy winter fog. My father could not endure the sudden, oppressive quiet. He operates on the frantic delusion that perception dictates reality, harboring a lifelong belief that whoever speaks the loudest controls the truth. If he could simply seize the narrative, He genuinely thought he could alter the certified facts sitting in that manila folder. He lunged forward. His heavy leather shoes thudded aggressively against the patterned carpet. He abandoned all pretense of high society decorum. Shoving past a bewildered waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes, he scrambled up the short, carpeted stairs to the podium. His face flushed a deep, mottled red with chaotic energy. He reached out and snatched the microphone directly from Maya. His sudden, aggressive movement caused a harsh, piercing screech of audio feedback to erupt from the ballroom speakers. Several guests winced, covering their ears to block out the shrill noise. My father gripped the edges of the wooden podium tightly. He leaned his weight into the stand, attempting to project the authoritative, commanding patriarch persona he had utilized to control our household for 30 years. Maya, sweetheart, you are severely misunderstanding the situation. My father pleaded into the microphone. His voice trembled, betraying the sheer panic he desperately tried to conceal beneath a layer of forced warmth. This is nothing more than a private family matter. It is a minor financial friction, a simple accounting error between siblings. Chloe is just confused about the trust fund timelines. Tyler loves you. We love you. Let us not air dirty laundry in front of your esteemed colleagues. I stood near the entrance of the ballroom, watching him attempt to gaslight a room filled with neurosurgeons, corporate litigators, and hospital administrators. It was a spectacular, almost fascinating display of supreme arrogance. He actually believed his patriarchal bluster could overwrite certified banking records and documented federal fraud evidence. He assumed he could manipulate a crowd of highly educated professionals the same way he manipulated my mother and bullied me throughout my childhood. Julian did not wait for my father to spin another web of deceit. My fiancé stepped away from my side, moving toward the elevated stage with the fluid, measured stride of a predator cornering its prey. He ascended the stairs without rushing. He did not display a single ounce of anger. He projected an aura of absolute, unyielding corporate authority. He stepped right next to my father at the podium. Julian did not wrestle for the microphone. He did not engage in a physical struggle. He simply extended his open hand, his posture radiating a silent, lethal command. My father looked at Julian. In that brief second, my father saw the stark difference between a man who pretends to hold power and a man who actually wields it on a daily basis. Defeated by pure, unflinching presence, my father slowly relinquished his grip on the microphone, handing it over to a man he had dismissed as a low-level clerk just 2 days prior. Julian adjusted the metal stand. He looked out at the sea of shocked faces, allowing the room to settle, before turning his cold gaze back to my father. Financial friction does not constitute a federal crime. Richard, Julian stated. His voice was a calm, resonant baritone that carried easily to the very back of the Ritz-Carlton dining room. Borrowing money from a relative is an internal dispute. Forging a signature to secure a $300,000 home equity line of credit is identity theft. Submitting those forged financial documents to a multinational hospitality corporation to secure a franchise agreement is wire fraud. Julian paused, letting the harsh legal reality crush the last of my father's defenses. Furthermore, Julian continued, locking eyes with my father, Tyler is not delayed by downtown traffic tonight. He is currently being held without bail in a holding cell at the 5th District Police Station. He was arrested by Chicago law enforcement hours ago for attempted aggravated assault and credit fraud. The elegant dining room fractured. It was not a loud, chaotic noise, but rather a collective, synchronized movement of sheer, undeniable repulsion. The guests invited by Maya are individuals whose entire careers rely on impeccable ethics, strict compliance, and rigorous background checks. They do not associate with felons. They do not dine with fraudsters. Chairs scraped harshly against the polished hardwood floor beneath the carpet as dozens of highly respected professionals stood up simultaneously. A prominent chief of surgery sitting at the front table shook his head in profound disgust. placing his linen napkin on his untouched plate and motioning for his wife to gather her evening coat. The social execution was swift, silent, and merciless. My parents were instantly rendered radioactive pariahs. They were no longer the proud parents of a wealthy, successful entrepreneur preparing to marry a brilliant doctor. They were the desperate enablers of a jailed criminal, exposed and humiliated in front of the exact high society tier they so desperately craved to join. The crushing weight of the social annihilation broke my mother. The reality she had sacrificed my future to maintain shattered into irrecoverable pieces. Her knees gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the expensive carpet right next to the head table. She did not faint gracefully. She began to wail. It was a guttural, harrowing sound that echoed terribly through the elegant ballroom. She slammed her palms against the floor, sobbing and calling out Tyler's name over and over again. She mourned the loss of her golden child, the loss of her elevated status, and the sudden death of her fictional wealth. The departing guests stepped around her, averting their eyes, treating her presence like a hazardous spill that needed to be avoided at all costs. Maya stood on the stage, watching the pathetic display below her. She possessed an incredible reservoir of internal strength. She did not shed a single tear for the man she almost married. She descended the short staircase, her crimson gown trailing elegantly behind her. She walked directly toward the table where my mother was weeping on the floor, and my father stood paralyzed, staring blankly at the wall. Maya stopped right in front of them. She raised her left hand. She grasped the large diamond engagement ring Tyler had placed on her finger, a ring undoubtedly purchased with funds drained from my grandfather's trust. She slid the heavy diamond over her knuckle. She did not hand it back to them. She extended her arm and dropped the ring directly onto the nearest china dinner plate. The heavy jewelry hit the porcelain with a sharp, resonant clink. The metallic sound cut straight through my mother's loud sobbing. It was the undeniable sound of a contract terminating. "The wedding is officially canceled," Maya declared. Her tone offered zero room for negotiation, debate, or apologies. She looked down at my father, her dark eyes flashing with unadulterated contempt. "You engineered this deception. You funded this illusion. Therefore, you own the financial consequences. The invoice for this rehearsal dinner, the premium catering, the ballroom rental, and every single cancellation fee associated with tomorrow's ceremony will be billed directly to your home address. Do not attempt to contact me again." Maya turned her back on them. She walked across the dining room. The sea of remaining guests parted seamlessly to let her through, offering her a clear path to the exit. She approached the archway where I stood waiting. The severe, authoritative expression she wore on stage softened for a brief, genuine moment. She reached out and wrapped her arms around me in a tight, fiercely protective embrace. It was a profound moment of solidarity. We were two independent women who refused to be treated as collateral damage in Tyler's destructive narrative. We chose the harsh truth over comfortable lies. She pulled back, gave me a firm nod of mutual respect, and turned toward her own family waiting near the cloakroom. Maya linked her arms securely with her mother and father, holding her head high. She walked out of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, her posture radiating immense pride and resilience, leaving my parents entirely alone in the spectacular wreckage of their own making. 72 hours is a remarkably brief window of time for a 30-year illusion to disintegrate. When the sophisticated guests exited the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, they took my parents' fabricated social standing with them. But the real devastation occurred on Monday morning when the financial institutions opened for business. Banks do not care about social embarrassment or family hierarchy. They operate strictly on risk assessment and compliance mandates. The moment First Trust Fidelity processed the formal police report regarding the forged signature on the home equity line of credit, their automated loss prevention protocols engaged with ruthless efficiency. The $300,000 loan was immediately classified as a fraudulent default. My parents received a certified courier notice demanding the balance paid in full within 24 hours. They obviously lacked the liquid capital to satisfy the debt. The bank executed an emergency lien on the property. My mother always considered her 6-bedroom colonial house in Oak Park to be the ultimate symbol of her superiority. She spent 2 decades manicuring the front lawn and hosting neighborhood association meetings in her formal dining room just to ensure everyone knew she resided in the upper echelons of the suburbs. On Tuesday afternoon, a county sheriff vehicle parked in her pristine driveway. 2 armed deputies approached the front door, carrying eviction notices and heavy brass padlocks. They gave my parents exactly 2 hours to gather their essential belongings and vacate the premises. The custom mahogany front door was sealed shut. A bright neon legal sticker was slapped across the wood. Warning against trespassing. The fortress my mother built to project her wealth was locked away by the very institution she tried to defraud. The financial dominoes continued to fall. The $50,000 wedding deposit, held by Avalon Hotels, was formally seized. Julian ensured the corporate legal team routed the funds into a secure escrow account to cover the damages associated with Tyler submitting a fraudulent franchise application. The cash vanished into a corporate ledger, never to return to my brother's hands. Simultaneously, Aunt Brenda initiated her own legal strike. After reading the highlighted documents I provided at the coffee shop, she bypassed family loyalty and hired a seasoned civil litigator. She filed a lawsuit against my father for breach of fiduciary duty and the misappropriation of her retirement funds. She demanded the immediate return of her $40,000, plus extensive legal fees. She also filed a secondary motion to place a freeze on any remaining liquid assets my parents possessed to prevent them from hiding the money. Stripped of their home, their credit lines, and their extended family network, my parents faced immediate destitution. The country club memberships and the luxury car leases evaporated into thin air. By Wednesday evening, they were carrying their hastily packed suitcases into a dismal roadside motel located right off the interstate highway. The glowing neon sign outside their new residence buzzed with a faulty electrical hum. The cracked asphalt parking lot offered a sharp contrast to the heated garage they enjoyed just days prior. They liquidated the final remnants of their legitimate savings to secure a high-risk bail bond for Tyler. They drained their last available dimes to hire a criminal defense attorney, desperately trying to keep their golden child out of a federal penitentiary while they slept on cheap mattresses smelling of stale tobacco. Physical distance did not stop my mother from launching a psychological assault. Isolated in a cramped motel room with the crushing consequences of her own actions, she directed her spiraling panic toward my phone. Over the course of 3 days, she left 34 separate voicemail messages. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping hot tea, and listened to every single audio file. As a risk auditor, I am trained to evaluate audio logs for inconsistencies and behavioral patterns. Her messages provided a fascinating study in manipulative deterioration. The initial voicemails were saturated with venomous rage. She screamed into the receiver, her voice sharp and grating against the microphone. She called me a cold-blooded monster. She accused me of destroying my own bloodline over a trivial amount of money. She swore I would die alone, because no decent family would ever accept a woman who sent the authorities after her own brother. She tried to use anger to force my submission, relying on the old dynamic where her rage would compel my obedience. When the anger failed to elicit a response, the tone shifted drastically. By the second day, the screaming dissolved into theatrical weeping. The threats were replaced by frantic bargaining. She begged me to call the federal investigators and retract my statement. She pleaded with me to sign a sworn affidavit stating I gave Tyler verbal permission to use my social security number. She wanted me to perjure myself in federal court to save him from prison. The final voicemails were stripped of any remaining pride. They were the raw, unfiltered sounds of a woman staring into an abyss. "Chloe?" she sobbed, the audio crackling with static from her cheap mobile connection. "Please drop the charges. We have nothing left. We are sleeping in a motel room with peeling wallpaper. Tyler is facing a decade in prison. You hold the power to stop this. Save our lives. I am begging you on my knees. You cannot let your own family drown. I did not delete the messages. I did not block her number. Blocking her would prevent me from gathering crucial evidence. Instead, I carefully exported every single audio file from my mobile device. I created a secure digital folder, labeled the files chronologically, and transmitted the entire archive directly to my personal attorney. Her recorded admissions of begging me to alter my testimony constituted witness tampering and obstruction of justice. They were highly valuable legal assets, confirming her complicity in the ongoing fraud. I closed my laptop and listened to the quiet hum of my apartment. The silence was peaceful. It was the sound of safety. For my entire life, my family conditioned me to believe that my value was intrinsically tied to my usefulness. I was the silent engine operating in the background, expected to absorb their failures and fund their extravagant illusions. They demanded endless grace while offering zero protection in return. I poured the rest of my tea down the sink. Pity is a luxury. It requires an emotional surplus that I was no longer willing to spend on people who viewed me as a disposable resource. I had severed the diseased branches from my life, and the tree was finally beginning to thrive. I prepared my briefcase for the next workday, assuming the legal machinery would slowly grind my parents into obscurity over the coming months. I was wrong to assume they would surrender quietly. Desperation breeds wild, unpredictable tactics. When cornered, predators often fake an injury to draw their target closer. The following morning, my phone would ring with a frantic call from a county hospital, initiating a medical emergency designed to lure me right back into their grasp. The stage was being meticulously set for one final, pathetic performance, and they were banking on a daughter's instinct to rush to the bedside of her dying father. Wednesday morning arrived with a deceptive calm that masked the desperate machinations brewing across the city. I sat in my corner office, sipping hot tea and reviewing a complex compliance report when my mobile device vibrated against the mahogany desk. The caller identification displayed the main dispatch number for the county medical center. A sudden call from a hospital typically elicits a visceral wave of panic. I answered the phone, and a woman with a brisk, clinical voice identified herself as a triage nurse from the emergency department. She informed me that my father, Richard, had been rushed into the facility via ambulance an hour prior, suffering from what appeared to be a severe myocardial infarction, a heart attack. She stated he was currently stabilized in a monitored room, but was experiencing significant cardiovascular distress. According to the nurse, my father was repeatedly calling my name, asking to see his daughter before his condition deteriorated any further. The biological programming instilled in every child instantly urged me to drop my files, sprint to my vehicle, and rush to his bedside. A daughter is conditioned to forgive everything when faced with the impending mortality of a parent. But the biological instinct collided violently with the rigorous, analytical training of a corporate risk auditor. In the world of financial fraud, timing is rarely a coincidence. My parents were currently facing federal indictment, the foreclosure of their prized suburban home, and the impending incarceration of their golden child. Their leverage was entirely eradicated. They possessed no money, no social standing, and no legal defense. A sudden, fatal medical emergency occurring mere hours before the federal investigators finalized their fraud packet felt mathematically improbable. It felt like a calculated deployment of the ultimate sympathy card. I did not rush blindly into the night. I terminated the call with the triage nurse and immediately dialed Julian. My fiancé possesses a brilliant tactical mind and shares my profound skepticism regarding my family. I explained the situation to him in 4 concise sentences. He instructed me to remain at my office building while he dispatched his car to collect me. Julian did not arrive alone. Sitting in the back seat of his vehicle was my personal civil litigation attorney, a formidable man named Harrison who specializes in prosecuting predatory financial behavior. as we navigated the congested Chicago traffic toward the county medical center. We discussed the legal implications of a deathbed scenario. Harrison warned me that desperate individuals facing lengthy prison sentences often utilize extreme psychological coercion to extract legal waivers from sympathetic relatives. He instructed me to keep my hands firmly in my coat pockets and refuse to sign any documentation, regardless of how dire the medical situation appeared. We walked through the sliding glass doors of the emergency department. The environment was a chaotic symphony of buzzing monitors, paging intercoms, and the sharp scent of industrial bleach. We bypassed the waiting area and navigated the sterile corridors until we reached room 412. I took a slow, measured breath to steady my pulse before pushing open the heavy wooden door. The scene inside the hospital room was meticulously staged for maximum emotional impact. My father lay in the center of the narrow hospital bed. He wore a faded, standard-issue medical gown. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. He clutched the thin cotton blanket near his chest, projecting the fragile vulnerability of a man teetering on the edge of the abyss. My mother sat in a plastic visitor chair positioned right next to his pillow. She was hunched over, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. However, my trained eyes immediately scanned the room for inconsistencies. In a genuine cardiac crisis, the room is typically swarming with medical personnel. There is a palpable sense of clinical urgency. There are intravenous lines pushing blood thinners and beta blockers. Room 412 was entirely empty of medical staff. My father had a simple nasal cannula delivering a minor flow of oxygen, and 3 standard electrocardiogram patches adhered to his chest. There was no crash cart parked outside the door. My mother heard the door click shut and snapped her head upward. When she saw me standing at the foot of the bed with Julian and my attorney flanking me, she launched into her performance. She did not stand up to offer a grieving embrace. She did not ask how I was coping with the terrifying news. Instead, she reached into her oversized leather handbag and pulled out a thick stack of printed legal documents fastened to a wooden clipboard. "Chloe, thank God you are here," my mother wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured agony. "Your father suffered a massive cardiac event. The doctors say his heart is failing under the immense stress of this federal investigation. He cannot survive the thought of going to prison. He is slipping away from us." She stood up and shoved the heavy clipboard directly toward my chest. I kept my hands firmly anchored inside my trench coat pockets, letting the clipboard hover in the empty space between us. "His dying wish is to make peace with you," she pleaded, tears spilling over her lower eyelids. "He wants to know his family is intact before his heart gives out completely. All you have to do is sign this affidavit of voluntary consent. It just confirms that you gave us verbal permission to utilize your credit profile for the home equity loan. It clears up the misunderstanding with the bank. Please, Chloe, give your dying father the gift of peace. Do not let his final moments be filled with the terror of a criminal prosecution." It was a breathtaking display of psychological extortion. She was using the illusion of impending death as a weapon to secure a legal pardon. She wanted me to perjure myself, to legally take ownership of their $300,000 forged debt, simply to ease the conscience of a man faking a medical emergency. I did not look at the fraudulent affidavit trembling in her hand. I bypassed her weeping face and directed my gaze to the digital telemetry monitor mounted on the wall above my father. In her desperate rush to orchestrate this emotional ambush, my mother failed to account for the fact that a risk auditor relies on empirical data, not dramatic performances. I read the glowing green and blue numbers flashing across the screen. I watched the steady, rhythmic peaks and valleys of the electrocardiogram wave. "His heart rate is 75 beats per minute," I stated, my voice echoing coldly through the quiet hospital room. "His blood pressure is 120/80. His oxygen saturation is resting comfortably at 99%. He is experiencing normal sinus rhythm." My mother froze. The clipboard trembled in her grip. "Those are the vital signs of a perfectly healthy adult male," I continued. maintaining my icy composure. He is not experiencing a myocardial infarction. He is not experiencing cardiovascular failure. His heart is functioning with absolute, unremarkable efficiency. My father squeezed his eyes shut tighter, letting out a theatrical groan and clutching his chest, desperately trying to salvage the failing charade. My mother opened her mouth to argue, prepared to claim the machines were malfunctioning or the medication was temporarily masking his fatal decline. Before she could utter a single syllable of defense, the heavy wooden door swung open behind us. The attending physician strode into the room, carrying a digital tablet. He possessed the cheerful, unbothered demeanor of a medical professional delivering excellent news. He did not notice the thick tension suffocating the room. "Well, Richard," the doctor announced loudly, tapping his stylus against the tablet screen. "I have fantastic news for you and your family. We ran a comprehensive metabolic panel, and your cardiac enzymes are completely clear. You did not suffer a heart attack." The doctor offered a reassuring smile to my paralyzed mother. "That terrifying chest pain you experienced this morning was just a severe esophageal spasm caused by acute acid reflux," the doctor explained happily. "It mimics the sensation of a cardiac event. But your heart is strong as an ox. Given the high levels of stress you mentioned earlier, severe heartburn is perfectly normal. We are writing you a standard prescription for over-the-counter antacids. The nurse will bring your discharge paperwork in about 20 minutes. You are entirely free to go home this afternoon." The doctor gave a brisk nod, tapped his tablet, and exited the room, blissfully unaware that he had just detonated a bomb on their final escape route. The heavy door clicked shut. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. The illusion was entirely shattered. The weeping, grieving mother and the dying father were instantly reduced to two desperate con artists caught executing a pathetic, transparent scam. My mother slowly lowered the clipboard. Her fake tears evaporated instantly, replaced by a hollow, sickening realization that her ultimate manipulation tactic had failed spectacularly. My father stopped clutching his chest. He opened his eyes and slowly sat up against the hospital pillows. He did not look weak. He looked like a cornered predator, realizing the trap had closed permanently. The monitors beside his bed continued to beep in a steady, healthy rhythm, mocking their elaborate lie. I looked at the two people who had spent my entire life exploiting my empathy. They had truly believed I was naive enough to sign away my financial freedom over a bout of severe heartburn. They assumed my loyalty to the concept of family would override my intellect. They miscalculated completely. The cruel, theatrical act ended in utter humiliation, leaving them completely exposed and vulnerable to the legal destruction standing right behind me. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind the attending physician. His cheerful footsteps faded down the linoleum hallway. The silence left in his wake was suffocating. The hospital room, previously staged as a solemn theater of impending grief, instantly transformed into a sterile trap. The digital telemetry monitor continued to beep in a steady, healthy rhythm. It was a rhythmic mockery of the elaborate deception my parents had just attempted to execute. My mother slowly lowered the wooden clipboard containing the fraudulent affidavit. Her hands shook. The manufactured tears dried on her cheeks, leaving behind streaks of ruined foundation and profound embarrassment. My father sat up against the crisp, white hospital pillows. The fragile, dying patriarch routine evaporated. The nasal cannula delivering oxygen to his nostrils suddenly looked like a pathetic prop from a low-budget stage play. He ripped the plastic tubing from his face and tossed it onto the bedside table. He glared at me, his chest heaving, realizing his ultimate emotional leverage had failed to extract the legal pardon he desperately needed. Harrison, my civil litigation attorney, did not allow the suffocating quiet to linger. He is a man who dismantles predatory financial schemes for a living. He understands that when fraudsters are stripped of their illusions, you must strike before they can formulate a new narrative. Harrison stepped forward from the shadows near the doorway. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket and reached into the interior breast pocket. He produced two thick, Sealed legal envelopes. Harrison bypassed my paralyzed mother and walked directly to the side of the hospital bed. He dropped the heavy envelopes right onto my father's lap. The crisp paper landed with a harsh smack against the thin cotton blanket. "Consider yourselves officially served," Harrison stated. His voice was a flat, uncompromising baritone. My father stared down at the documents. His hands trembled as he tore open the flap of the top envelope. He pulled out the thick stack of legal filings. The header on the first page displayed the official seal of the Federal District Court. Harrison did not wait for my father to read the dense legal jargon. He narrated their downfall with clinical precision. "Those are formal summons for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation," Harrison explained. "You are also holding a civil injunction freezing every remaining asset registered in your names." The federal authorities have the comprehensive fraud packet Chloe compiled. The bank has verified the forged signature on the home equity line of credit. You are no longer dealing with a frustrated daughter. You are dealing with the United States Department of Justice. My mother let out a strangled gasp. She dropped the wooden clipboard onto the floor. The plastic edge cracked against the hard tiles. She covered her face with both hands, retreating into the corner of the small room, finally comprehending that her suburban kingdom was permanently destroyed. My father did not weep. He did not plead for mercy. When a narcissist is pushed into a corner and stripped of all manipulative power, they do not apologize. They attack. Decades of carefully concealed resentment boiled over. His face flushed a dark, dangerous crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against his skin. He threw the legal documents across the bed, sending pages scattering across the sterile floor. He locked his eyes onto mine. The mask of the firm but loving patriarch burned away entirely. What remained was a man who viewed his own child merely as a disposable utility. "You ungrateful, miserable machine," my father roared. His voice echoed violently off the blank hospital walls. "You have always been nothing but a rigid, boring spreadsheet. You possess zero charm. You possess no vision. Tyler has the spark. He has the charisma to navigate elite circles and build a real empire. He just needed the financial backing to shine." He leaned forward, his hands gripping the metal guardrails of the hospital bed. He weaponized the truth he had hidden for 30 years, desperate to inflict maximum emotional damage. "We took your money because you do not deserve a lavish wedding." He spat, his words dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "You would have wasted that trust fund on a pathetic backyard gathering with your dull friends. Tyler needed a grand stage. We used your credit because your only real value in this family was providing a foundation for your brother to succeed. You were never the star. Chloe, you are just the tool we used to pave the road for him. And now you are destroying your own bloodline over a pile of cash you do not even know how to enjoy." His voice cracked on the final syllable. He sat back, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in erratic bursts. He looked at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. He expected his brutal honesty to break me. He expected me to crumble under the weight of his lifelong rejection, to burst into tears and flee the room in devastating heartbreak. He miscalculated. Again. I did not flinch. The monitor behind him beeped its steady, unbothered rhythm. The air in the room felt remarkably clear. Harrison reached into his other suit pocket. He slowly extracted a small, sleek digital recording device. A red light blinked steadily on the top edge of the metal casing. He held it up for my parents to see. Illinois law recognizes an exception to dual consent recording when capturing evidence of an ongoing extortion attempt or gathering evidence of a crime. Harrison noted smoothly. You summoned us to this room under false medical pretenses to coerce your daughter into signing a fraudulent legal waiver. When that failed, you provided a voluntary, uncoerced verbal confession detailing your motive and intent behind the identity theft. This recording will be submitted directly to the federal prosecutor as Exhibit A. My father stared at the blinking red light. The fiery rage drained from his face, replaced by a hollow, sickening terror. He had just handed the prosecution the exact motive required to guarantee a maximum sentence. He had sealed his own fate with his own arrogant tongue. I looked at the man lying in the hospital bed. For 30 years, I carried the exhausting burden of trying to earn his affection. I spent my childhood striving for perfect grades. I spent my adulthood maintaining pristine credit and securing a prestigious career. I internalized their neglect, silently wondering what fundamental flaw existed within me that made me so unworthy of their pride. Hearing him explicitly state that I was merely a financial utility did not break my heart. It set me free. The heavy, suffocating chain of familial obligation shattered into dust. I did not need to earn their love, because their love was never available for purchase. They were incapable of offering it. The grief of losing a father was replaced by the liberating realization that I never truly had one to begin with. I took a step closer to the foot of the bed. I kept my posture perfectly straight. I looked down at him with a profound, untroubled serenity. "Thank you." "Dad," I said softly. My father blinked in confusion. His hands trembled against the white sheets. "I have waited 30 years to hear you say those words," I continued. My voice held no anger, no sorrow, and no lingering attachment. I spent my entire life wondering why I was never enough for this family. Your confession just proved that the deficit was never mine. It was always yours. I turned away from the hospital bed. I looked at Julian, who stood near the door watching me with quiet, unwavering pride. I looked at Harrison, who slipped the digital recorder safely back into his pocket. "I do not owe this family anything anymore," I stated. "Not my money, not my time, and certainly not my guilt. Enjoy the federal indictment." I walked out of room 412. I did not look back at my mother, weeping in the corner. I did not look at the scattered legal documents covering the floor. I stepped into the bright, bustling hospital corridor and felt a tremendous weight lift from my shoulders. The emotional execution was complete. The fraudulent illusion they built around their golden child was incinerated. But the final consequence, the ultimate financial payload engineered by my grandfather decades ago, was still waiting in the dark. As I walked toward the hospital exit, my phone vibrated with a message from the senior trust attorney. The real inheritance was about to be activated, and my parents had no idea what they had just forfeited. My 30th birthday did not begin with a celebration. It began with the heavy click of a brass deadbolt echoing through the executive conference room at Caldwell & Associates. This high-rise legal firm manages the generational wealth of Chicago's oldest industrial families. I sat at one end of a sprawling mahogany table. Julian sat to my left, his presence providing a steady, silent anchor. Mr. Caldwell, the senior executor of my late grandfather's estate, sat at the head of the table, adjusting his tortoiseshell reading glasses. We were waiting for the custodians. My parents were compelled to attend this meeting by a federal court order. The pending fraud investigation required them to formally dissolve their fiduciary status over my grandfather's trust. When the heavy oak door swung open, the two figures who walked into the room bore zero resemblance to the arrogant predators I had faced in the hospital a week prior. The weight of the federal indictment had crushed their posture. The sudden foreclosure of their suburban fortress had stripped away their polished gloss. My father wore a gray suit that hung loosely on his frame, the fabric unpressed and smelling faintly of cheap motel soap. My mother avoided making eye contact with anyone. She stared at the expensive carpet. Clutching a faded canvas tote bag instead of her usual designer purse, they looked hollow, diminished, and entirely defeated. They took their seats at the opposite end of the long table. My father let out a quiet, bitter sigh. He assumed this meeting was merely a bureaucratic scolding. He believed the damage was already capped at the $80,000 they stole. He thought the ultimate punishment was simply the public humiliation of signing a document confirming the cash account was empty. He fundamentally misunderstood the man who drafted the trust. My grandfather built a manufacturing empire during severe economic recessions. He was a ruthless, brilliant pragmatist. He recognized very early on that his son was a fragile man obsessed with superficial aesthetics. My grandfather also recognized that I spent my teenage years studying actuarial tables in the local library instead of attending country club galas. He did not just leave me a simple wedding fund. He built a financial labyrinth designed specifically to test his son's integrity. And he rigged it with a devastating tripwire. Mr. Caldwell opened a thick, leather-bound binder. He placed his hands flat on the table and looked directly at my father. Richard, I must ask you a procedural question before we execute the dissolution, Caldwell stated, his voice a dry, echoing baritone. When you authorized the wire transfer of the liquid assets last month, did you retain outside counsel to review the trust indenture stipulations? My father scoffed. He leaned back in his leather chair, attempting to summon a fraction of his former bravado. It was a basic savings account, he muttered. There was no need to hire an attorney to withdraw cash. We were the legal guardians. We had the authority to move the money to help our son. You had the authority to manage the funds. Caldwell corrected him sharply. You did not possess the authority to embezzle them for unapproved commercial ventures. Arrogance often prevents individuals from reading the fine print. Caldwell flipped to page 17 of the massive legal document. He slid a copy of the original signature page across the polished wood. He informed my parents that the cash account they drained was merely a minor liquidity vehicle. It was a decoy. The $80,000 was tethered to a massive, hidden shadow portfolio. Caldwell distributed the certified asset lists. I watched my father pick up the heavy stock paper. I watched his eyes scan the ledger. He read the itemized list of blue-chip dividend stocks. He processed the commercial real estate index funds. He saw the unvested corporate bonds. The bottom line figure rested cleanly at $2 million. My father stopped breathing. His hands began to shake so violently the heavy paper rattled in the quiet room. The wedding fund was just the bait. I told him, keeping my voice as cold and precise as a winter breeze. Grandfather knew you could not resist stealing from me. If you thought the amount was small enough to sweep under the rug, he engineered a trap to see if you possessed even a shred of moral restraint. You failed the test. Caldwell adjusted his glasses and began to read the forfeiture protocol aloud. He detailed the specific risk clause my grandfather buried deep within the 40-page document. Any breach of fiduciary duty, including the unauthorized withdrawal of the liquid asset pool for non-educational purposes, triggered an immediate and irrevocable termination of custodial rights due to your documented embezzlement. The entire $2 million portfolio is automatically unsealed, Caldwell announced. The assets transferred directly to Chloe, effective immediately, bypassing the original maturation date. You forfeit all administrative claims. My father opened his mouth, but his vocal cords refused to function. He was staring at a fortune that had been sitting right under his nose for over a decade. He had traded a massive financial empire for a fraction of its value just to fund Tyler's fake restaurant franchise. But the final, lethal strike was yet to come. The true genius of my grandfather's design lay in the reward he offered for simple human decency. Caldwell turned to page 32. He pointed a silver pen at a highlighted paragraph. He explained the management commission structure. If my parents had simply maintained the trust, if they had just left the $80,000 alone and waited 7 more days for my 30th birthday, the legal framework mandated a 30% payout to the custodians. If you had executed your duties with basic honesty, Caldwell explained, watching the color drain entirely from my mother's face, the trust would have disbursed a management fee of $600,000 directly to your personal accounts upon Chloe turning 30. The silence that followed that statement was heavy enough to crush bone. $600,000. That amount would have paid off their forged home equity line of credit. It would have saved their 6-bedroom suburban house from foreclosure. It would have funded the premium defense attorneys required to keep Tyler out of a federal penitentiary. It would have preserved their reputation. their freedom, and their comfortable lifestyle. They threw away their salvation to steal pennies. By succumbing to their own unchecked greed and profound financial ignorance, they incinerated their only escape route. They willingly handed a $2 million fortune directly to the daughter they deemed invisible. The mathematical reality of her own stupidity hit my mother like a physical blow. The realization that her blind devotion to Tyler had cost her $600,000 in legal, untaxed cash severed her final tether to consciousness. Her breath hitched in a sharp, ragged gasp. Her eyes rolled backward, showing only the whites. Her body went entirely limp. She slid sideways off the heavy leather chair, collapsing in a heap onto the thick, carpeted floor. Her canvas tote bag spilled open, scattering cheap motel keycards and crumpled tissues across the ground. My father did not drop to his knees to help her. He sat paralyzed in his chair, his unblinking eyes locked onto the asset ledger, detailing the $2 million he had just forfeited. He looked like a man who had just watched his own executioner pull the lever. Julian reached for his coffee cup, taking a slow, unbothered sip. Mr. Caldwell calmly organized his paperwork, tapping the edges of the files against the mahogany table to align them perfectly. I looked down at the woman lying unconscious on the floor. For decades, I was expected to rush to her aid whenever she manufactured a crisis. I was trained to sacrifice my stability to ensure she never had to face the consequences of her actions. I did not move a single muscle. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out my favorite pen, and signed my name on the final transfer authorization forms. The ink flowed smoothly across the page. The audit was complete. The ledger was finally balanced. 9 months passed since the heavy brass lock engaged on the executive conference room door. The transition from that sterile, suffocating legal office to the vibrant botanical gardens along the shores of Lake Michigan felt like stepping onto an entirely different planet. Julian and I chose to host our wedding ceremony inside a historic glass conservatory surrounded by towering exotic flora. The architecture of the building was magnificent, featuring arched iron beams and crystal-clear panes that allowed the afternoon sunlight to flood the interior. We did not hire ice sculptors. We did not order imported floral chandeliers or a 6-course plated dinner designed to impress superficial business associates. We prioritized elegance, intimacy, and authenticity. Our guest list was strictly limited to 40 individuals. These were people of genuine substance and profound character. We invited trusted corporate mentors, our brilliant legal advisors, and fiercely loyal friends who had proven their worth through actions rather than empty promises. Not a single person carrying my maiden name received an invitation. The absence of my biological relatives did not leave a hollow void in the room. Instead, their exclusion created a profound, breathable space. The air inside the conservatory felt incredibly clean. I walked down the stone pathway wearing a simple, flawlessly tailored silk gown. I did not need a father to give me away, because I had already claimed ownership of my own life. Maya arrived at the reception looking absolutely magnificent. She wore a striking emerald green cocktail dress that complemented her poised, authoritative posture. She did not look like a woman who had narrowly escaped a disastrous, fraudulent marriage. She looked like a professional who had successfully excised a malignant tumor and recovered with breathtaking speed. The heavy burden of Tyler and his endless web of deceit was completely gone from her shoulders. We stood together near a serene reflecting pool filled with koi fish, sipping sparkling mineral water. Maya informed me she had recently been appointed as the youngest head of neurosurgery in her hospital network. We did not discuss my brother. Tyler was a permanently closed file. We discussed real estate investments, global travel, and our respective career trajectories. We stood side by side as two independent women who recognized the supreme value of self-preservation and the necessity of severing ties with toxic predators. I knew the exact fate of my former family because Aunt Brenda occasionally sent lengthy emails attempting to hurl guilt from afar. I routed her messages directly to a hidden spam folder. But I reviewed the final updates strictly for auditing purposes. A financial risk auditor always verifies the final settlement of a liability. The federal judicial system did not grant my brother any leniency. White-collar fraud involving forged identities and stolen financial assets carries mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. Tyler stood before a federal judge and attempted to utilize his charismatic golden boy persona to secure a reduced penalty. The judge remained entirely unimpressed by his manufactured tears. Tyler was sentenced to 18 months in a federal correctional institution. He was forced to trade his leased luxury sports cars and counterfeit designer suits for standard-issue prison uniforms and a rigid, concrete cell. The man who desperately craved elite social status was finally experiencing a highly structured environment where manipulation held zero currency. He possessed no internet access, no high society events to crash, and no parents available to shield him from the daily, grinding reality of his confinement. My parents faced a financial ruin entirely of their own making. The forced liquidation of their remaining assets barely covered their initial legal retainers. The bank swiftly finalized the foreclosure proceedings on their prized suburban property, stripped of their home, their credit lines, and their social standing. They were left with no alternative but to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They currently reside in a decaying, low-income apartment complex on the far industrial outskirts of the city. The walls of their new unit are thin, the appliances are faulty, and the view from their window overlooks a congested highway instead of manicured country club greens. The crushing weight of their unpayable debt and their spectacular public humiliation permanently severed their ties to the pretentious society they worshipped. Their former friends refused to return their calls. They are isolated, impoverished, and burdened with the agonizing, inescapable knowledge that they orchestrated their own demise. Every single day, they must wake up and remember the exact mathematical equation of their greed. They gambled a $2 million fortune for temporary prestige, threw away a guaranteed $600,000 management fee, and lost their fundamental survival in the process. As the sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, casting a vibrant orange and violet glow across the lake, our 40 guests gathered around a long banquet table under the glass atrium. The catering staff poured vintage champagne into crystal flutes. Julian stood up at the head of the table. He buttoned his suit jacket and smiled. He did not waste a single syllable on the people who had tried to destroy us. He did not mention the fraud, the courtroom battles, or the toxic history of my childhood. He focused entirely on the present moment and the strength of the individuals sitting in the room. Julian looked around the table, acknowledging the brilliant, loyal people who chose to stand by our side. Then he turned his gaze to me. His dark eyes reflected a deep, unshakable respect. He raised his crystal glass into the air. "I propose a toast," Julian announced. His voice resonated with quiet, undeniable power, echoing gently against the glass panes of the conservatory. "Here is to those who build their own value when no one else believes in them. Here is to the architects of their own salvation." The guests raised their glasses in unison. The crystal chimed in a beautiful, harmonious chorus. I took a slow sip of the dry champagne. I looked at the man who partnered with me to dismantle a legacy of exploitation. I looked at the beautiful, peaceful life I had secured. I lost a biological family that viewed me merely as an exploitable resource. In exchange, I gained my absolute freedom, my self-respect, and the vast financial portfolio that rightfully belonged to me. The people who intended to use me as a stepping stone were now buried under the rubble of their own deceit. Society often expects victims of familial abuse to harbor endless forgiveness. Society demands we keep the peace, smile through the disrespect, and sacrifice our own sanity to protect the facade of the family unit. I chose a different path. I chose mathematics. I chose rigorous documentation. I chose the unforgiving clarity of the law. This outcome was never about vengeance. Revenge is an emotional, chaotic response born from unresolved pain and lingering attachment. What I executed was entirely different. I identified a critical vulnerability in a corrupt system. I gathered the certified evidence. I presented the undeniable facts to the governing authorities and allowed the liabilities to neutralize themselves. I stopped absorbing their debts and simply forced them to pay their own invoices. I set my empty champagne flute on the white linen tablecloth. I took Julian by the hand, and we walked out onto the terrace to watch the stars emerge over the water. The night air was calm and silent. The ledger was finally closed. The balance was permanently restored. It was simply the most perfect, comprehensive audit of my entire life. Looking out over the dark expanse of Lake Michigan from the conservatory terrace, I finally understood the profound difference between surviving a toxic environment and actively dismantling it. For 3 decades, my parents conditioned me to believe that endless self-sacrifice was the mandatory rent I had to pay for a seat at my own family dinner table. I was taught that enduring manipulation was simply the definition of loyalty. That night, standing next to a man who valued my intellect over my compliance, I crystallized the reality of predatory relationships. The first lesson I extracted from this ordeal is that loyalty should never be treated as an unlimited line of credit. When you allow manipulative individuals to repeatedly withdraw from your emotional and financial reserves without ever making a deposit, you are not being a supportive relative. You are funding your own bankruptcy. True partnership requires mutual investment. If someone demands you sacrifice your personal stability to mask their incompetence, they do not love you. They are merely using you as a human shield against their own consequences. The second lesson is the unparalleled power of documentation. Manipulators thrive in the chaotic realm of manufactured emotion. They deploy tears, rage, and guilt to distort reality, hoping to exhaust you into submission. You cannot defeat them by raising your voice or participating in their theatrical drama. You defeat them with cold, empirical data, gather the receipts, secure the certified records. Let them build their fragile house of lies, and then calmly remove the foundational brick with a single piece of verified evidence. Silence is not surrender. Silence is the tactical space where you prepare your defense. The third, and perhaps most liberating lesson, is that shared biology holds no inherent moral authority. Genetics dictate your starting point, but they do not mandate your destination. You possess the sovereign right to resign from any family dynamic that requires you to shrink your potential. You can terminate the individuals who actively sabotage your growth. More importantly, you can construct a new board of directors for your life. You can choose a partner who stands as your equal, friends who celebrate your genuine victories, and a community that recognizes your true worth without demanding a ransom. I stepped back inside the glass conservatory, leaving the chill of the night air behind. The string quartet played a vibrant, upbeat melody. Maya was laughing with Julian near the dance floor. My life is no longer a defensive ledger filled with red ink and unpayable emotional debts. It is a balanced, thriving enterprise. I did not just escape my family. I audited their deception, levied the penalties, and walked away with the principle intact. If my journey resonated with you, if you are currently balancing the books of your own toxic relationships and preparing to walk away, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Silent Vengeance Stories for more narratives about people who stopped absorbing the damage and finally presented the bill. Your worth is not negotiable. Never let anyone convince you otherwise.